So I'm Russian originated Jew, and we emigrated to Israel after the Soviet Union fell in 93.
So were you born in Russia?
So I was born in Russia, then lived in Crimea, which at the time was USSR, and after USSR fell became Ukraine. So I kind of born in Russia, lived in Ukraine. And then in 93, from Crimea, then under Ukraine, moved to Israel.
Okay, I did not know that about you. Oh, wow. So do you have lots of memories of this time period? Or?
So I have a lot of mishmash memories from the late Soviet Union. And from the fall of the Soviet Union, the two interesting years, and then Israel. So and I was 11 when I moved to Israel, so I was already reading books and all in Russian, so I kept the language kind of, So my language is, my Russian is not perfect, because I use it at home with my parents mostly, and I'm a consumer of culture, so I'm not, but practically I don't speak a lot of Russian in my day-to-day. And obviously I don't speak like clean Russian only with Russian, because most of my Russian language used with other Russian people in Israel. So it's a mishmash of Hebrew, English, and Russian words.
But Russian is supposed to be like a notoriously difficult language to learn.
Yeah.
Is that true? Or I heard that there was a rule that you're not supposed to use the same word twice in the same sentence or in the same paragraph or something.
There's a lot.
It's considered bad form or something.
It's a lot of rules. It's 33 letters. It's like very complicated language, but very beautiful and very, very rich.
Yeah. Like, lots of literature.
Yeah. So I really like my Russian heritage part and nurture it. So culturally, I'm very connected to Russia. Politically, not so much. Right. So like I would be like I know a lot about what happened in Russia, and I'm very interested in the political life there and Russian day to day and culture, and try to keep up with the culture and also pop culture and underground culture, whatever I can consume. But I have, full disclosure, I have very strong opinions towards the current Russian government, and also that's why I react sometimes when people call me Russian. I'm just like, no, Israeli.
So if we talk about that, is there a danger that you'll be poisoned or something?
I don't know. Always a danger, but no, it's not like, because I never had Russian nationality per se. I had USSR nationality, and then no nationality, I think, or Ukrainian nationality, because I was 11 at the time, so I didn't have the passport, and then an Israeli passport only. So, like, I don't consider myself a Russian national, and because of the current situation in Russia, I don't like to be associated. I have my own demons with my Israeli identity,
Okay, fair enough. So I guess there's a few directions we can go in. We can either talk about Russia, like, historically,
right,
like the fall of the Berlin Wall and all this kind of stuff, and the dissolution of the USSR. Like, that's an area that I don't know a whole lot about, but I know a little bit. We can either talk about that. We can either talk about modern day Russia and about how Putin came to power and what that whole process was like. And I mean, I read statistics, and they say that like Vladimir Putin is worth like $250 billion or something, and has access to crazy amounts of wealth. And so I'm curious to hear a bit more about the dynamics of how that works and how the Russian state is organized and things like this. We can either talk about that, or we can go straight into Israel. And
I kind of, like, from my experience with podcast and my admiration to the format, I kind of expect us to talk about all of them.
Okay.
The next 3 hours. Not sure which order. 3 hours is reach, I think. But yeah, obviously, if we talk about modern Russia, we will have to start with Putin, because Putin is like 17 years at power in Russia. So this is modern Russia. And in order to distinguish it from non-modern Russia, we will have to go a bit earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's a good place to start.
And I think we will get to Israel at some point.
Yeah. So okay, then for Putin, I guess the challenges. So for someone who grew up in England or grew up in the US, what is the most difficult thing to understand about Putin and his like mindset or approach to governance? Because it seems very different.
Well, what is What do you mean by understand, for example? Like, how do you understand Putin right now? What is your vision of Putin?
Like a strong man, like very authoritarian, a kind of government structure where the government has a strict enforcement over freedom of press and things like this. And yeah, I don't know. It's like, it just seems very difficult to live there in Russia. And to just like have your own ideas about things, like you can't criticize the government and
well, okay, so I actually now read a Russian book, modern days Russian journalist / historian. So he wrote a book about Russia 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, coming years before the revolution, the communist revolution. And he basically draws parallels between that time in Russia and the modern Russia under Putin, with groups fighting for power and the current political situation and the repressions and bad condition for press. Sorry, I just need to shut my phone. So it's not what's happening now under Putin. It's not new in Russia. It's a copycat system that relies on a lot of Russian technologies, political technologies, and Russian inventions in the PR industry and in the propaganda industry. Because Russians, even 100 and more years ago, were innovators in this kind of shady practices of regime enforcing its doctrine on the population and so on. So whatever happens in Russia now, it's not new for a lot of Russians. Okay. It's a bit of regression even. So a lot of it, not a lot of it, but many practices used now in Russia, they call it even, and Putin government, they call it, they're going back to traditional values.
Okay, what kinds of practices are you thinking about?
Traditional values, the church coming into power, so the Russian, the Orthodox Church, they were out of the game, in fact, de facto out of the game for the whole communist regime time. They were under, secret Russian Soviet secret service was basically the patriarch of the church, and under Putin, the church coming back to power, and you see having more and more and more influence, and there are a lot of theories now about Russia, basically Russian power, Russian politics. Stands on three, how do you call them?
Legs.
3 legs, 3, I don't know.
Pillars.
Pillars, yeah, exactly. So on 3 pillars, it's the Orthodox Church, is the criminal world, and it's the oligarchs. So basically, and on top of this pyramid is Putin, who is in power, and Putin represents the Secret Service branch, the KGB, the ex-KGB and now it's FSB and FSO and etc. But let's call them, the KGB or the FSB or whatever you will call them. So Putin is coming from this system, and all of his close friends coming from the ex-KGB and ex-Special Services agents. And he represents this power, and this is his muscle. Sometimes this muscle forces him into action, and not him forcing this muscle into action, because they are very powerful, and they'll always all these fractions fighting between themselves. And through this, he navigates the oligarchs, the criminal. When I say the criminal, I'm not talking about the pickpockets. I'm talking about all the criminals. So basically, if you're a pickpocket, you pay someone above you, and there is a theory that some of it gets to Putin, and that's a part of his alleged billions. By the way, the 250 billion sum that you mentioned, it's alleged, it's not proved.
Right.
Every leak, every investigation big investigation in Russia. When you follow the money, eventually, if you're like did not disappear during mysterious circumstances on your way, following the money
investigation,
you will get to someone who can be somehow connected to Putin, and every leak, every big data leak exposes individuals that allegedly hide money for Putin. Putin friends appear. When I say friends, I mean friends from childhood, friends, people who his closest circle, people who known to be his friends, and they always found to be shareholders of very rich companies connected to government of Russia. They appear in all kind of offshore accounts with a lot of money that they clearly didn't earn, and it never tracks back directly to Putin. He's not signed off under anything. But those people, and in Russia they call them wallets, like Putin wallets. So those people basically act in the name, not in the name of Putin, but in the interest of Putin, basically spending the money. So if Putin's new wife's grandmother needs a new apartment, one of the wallets buys her an apartment, and then this after a couple of years it gets exposed in the Russian opposition media,
right?
And then you can suffer a lot of consequences for publishing this kind of stuff. So, and this is how we know it. It's like pieces of information that fall slowly and surely into one big puzzle, and the middle of the puzzle is empty, but everybody know whose face is there. You just physically you can't prove it in court.
Sure. And where does all this money originate? Is it so? In some countries, you get essentially accusations of corruption where the government takes taxation money and funnels it away into offshore accounts. Is that the accusation in Russia, or is Russia different?
Well, I think we will. Here is the moment for us to take a step back a little bit, and just explain some basic terminology. Who against who, and what do we mean by corruption, and what do we mean by money? So let's start from the basics. Okay, and the basics. I, for example, I'm in this kind of business, let's say, of investigating stuff. I'm not an active investigator. Maybe we can
talk about that as a back. So what is your kind of career story, or how did you first get involved in this kind of stuff?
So actually, I'm a pharmacist.
Okay.
Actually, like every good Russian immigrant in Israel, I had to go to learn a profession that will put food on the table, and stuff, and it will always be something technical, like a software engineer, or something medicine related. So I wasn't good enough to being a doctor. It was a lot of studies, and put yourself in the line, and I'm just very lazy student. So medicine wasn't for me. So I took something resembling it, and slightly less effort than medicine.
See what that was.
Camera shut down.
Maybe. I wonder why.
Maybe you're out of battery.
I put a new battery in.
Out of memory?
I'm not sure actually. How did that happen? So use I think I know what the problem is.
What the problem is?
Installed basically the camera shuts down after 12 minutes normally because of EU regulations.
Right.
But I installed a software package which lets you continue, but I think I installed it on this memory card, not on that one. So that's why it's complaining.
Yeah.
Okay. But,
what the EU regulations like saying? Why?
Because I think if it records over a certain time, then it counts as a video camera, not as a stills camera. And
it's like different.
It's regulated in different ways. Okay, now it should be fine. Okay, so
I lost.
You were a pharmacist.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then, should we talk about pharmacy, or should we talk about how you transitioned into the...
like, I'm a pharmacist at this point in Israel, and it's like all good. Starting my first year, starting my second year. On my third year in my pharmacy studies, I got into really great student job that you can get into Prime Minister office, the Israeli Prime Minister office, in the Russian media department. So the situation is in Israel, there are almost 1.5 million people out of 8 million who speak Russian at some extent.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's basically there were 1 million Jews and families that emigrated from Russia and from former USSR into Israel after 91, and my family is among them. So there is a big attention that you pay as a politician to the Russian-speaking sector, and I got into working into the Prime Minister office, but in the Russian media department under the Russian media advisor.
Are there newspapers published in Israel in Russian?
Yeah, there are newspapers, there is a video channel, there is a TV channel in Russian. Out of the 4 governmental channels, one of them is in Russian and 3 in Hebrew. And there is a couple of radio stations, and there is a couple of like media portals. So yeah, that was really like interesting job to do, although it was a bit technical, but it was translations and basically monitoring the media, and summarizing it into a report that goes to the advisor, the media advisor, who then filters it out to the Prime Minister at the term. So it wasn't related to, basically I wasn't in touch and didn't have any connection to the Prime Minister because I was governmental employee for a couple of years. And was working under the Cushion, who is the basically the media advisor, who is has a touch to the Prime Minister.
Okay.
So I wasn't I wasn't a political assignment. It wasn't a political job. It was basically technical. Monitor the media, translate and summarize what's going on there, and then when the Prime Minister releases a press release in Hebrew, translate it to proper Russian, summarize, and connect it to the media. Okay. So, and this was during my pharmacy studies. So when I already finished the studies, I was already not satisfied with being a pharmacist. Okay. Because I got this other nice and interesting job that included working with media and, I got a view into this political world of Israel, which is like very messy, very Middle Eastern, very funny, very cruel, brutal, but like very provincial. Also.
Okay, very different to media landscape in the UK. Probably.
I don't know. Yeah, like very.
Well, in Israel, like everyone has political opinions, right? Like there's no.
Yeah, and the political system itself, I had, like you got this respect and view of the political system, but then when you get a touch to it from the inside, you're just like, oh yeah, it's like it's completely different. It's very amateur sometimes. Sometimes it's very provincial, no big thinking. It's and you just realize that everybody is people there. Yeah. So there, like when you view people on the TV, before that moment I was like, oh, those people in suits, they might understand something.
No, definitely not.
And then you just understand it. It's just like some of them understand a lot, some of them understand much less than you.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. Like even so at Newspeak House, you get a lot of government people, and you hear all these stories about like, people who are working on projects that require some kind of government budget, for example, and they literally won't be told whether they'll be funded or not until the day of the budget or the day before. Like the day before, people are still deciding how are we gonna. And this is like the UK budget. It seems to be something that's done way in advance, but even that is
it's
frantic, last minute.
It's exactly. Like, it's the stuff that you discover because you have this myth, you got this ethos of government, and you also want to think, because you want to think that the politician that you deal with know better, and you elect them for a reason, and they are elected for a reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's those revelations were really new to me and really like shocking and like wow. And after finishing my studies, I worked as a pharmacist for another year, and then me and my wife, we moved to London.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, in 2013. So my wife is she's British. She's British Israeli, and she's basically like me. When I moved to Israel when I was 11, she moved to Israel from the UK when she was 12. Oh, okay. But she has family here, so we were more than welcome in London. So when we moved in London, I had to choose a path. Basically, what do I want to be a pharmacist in the UK? Do I want to get certified in the UK, study a couple of years, and then take a pharmacy route? Or do I want to try to find myself elsewhere? And then I just started applying for a media analyst job and all kind of analysts. And I applied for a due diligence analyst and got accepted in a company that does basic business due diligence on companies. So if you're want to work in Russia, you hire managed services firm that check the company you want to work with in Russia, and recommend you some basic stuff, compliance violations in the company's history, yes, no, what is the overall integrity, etc., depending on how much money you pay. And and I discovered that it was very easy for me to switch into this field, into the compliance field, because I was very into what's going in Russia and most post-Soviet regions, Ukraine, Belarus, closest to Russia countries. I knew how the political mechanisms work also, so I knew how the basic from as a hobby, I was tracking a lot of Russian opposition works, how they tackle corruption, how they fight corruption in the crooked system, and that's basically when you can't go to the police because you're accusing the police, right? So what do you do? And how do they do investigations, and what do they search for? So it was really easy for me after this hobby to get into due diligence and into compliance.
And what was the kind of skill set that you needed in due diligence analysis? So was it similar to what you've done before with media analysis? Yeah, so the skill that you need is analysis, good or normal attention to detail, and attention to detail is a skill. Yep. So, you start slow and then you improve on practice. Were there any interesting cases that you were involved in when you were doing this work that I don't know, the average person might be quite shocked at? So this is this is a compliance due diligence. So whoever hires you, they're not interested to dig dirt. So for example, they're going into partnership with Russian medical supplier. Yeah. So this is a pharmaceutical company that is searching for a medical equipment distributor. So they check 5 distributors, for example, and you check all 5 of them, and 2 of them are clean and 3 of them are dirty. What does dirty mean in this context? So dirty means in this context company accused in I don't know, in cases of bribery, corruption. So this is a company that's under investigation for bribery in Russia. Okay. Or this company is under sanctions. I will explain later what does it mean being under sanctions. But any kind of, so I'll give you an example. So if the company is a known Putin's wallet, Putin's friends, but it's all it's all not proven. You can't prove this kind of stuff. It's like an extrapolation. So you say, okay, this company is a medical distributor who are clearly under one of politically exposed person, someone very important, probably is an owner of this company. But in Russian government is okay with it.
and the company is clean on paper, and and you're looking to work with them for a year. So your client not necessarily will say, I don't want to work with them. For your client will say, it's okay if the American government and the UK government don't consider this company an enemy, or don't consider this company as unscrupulous and not work and clear, and don't disallow to work with this company, I will work with them.
Even if they seem to be quite suspicious and...
So this is the thing. This is not so from a business point of view. You as a businessman looking to work in Russia, you have an interest. You have a business interest. So you want to work with companies that, first of all, that the company won't steal your money. Yeah. That the company will deliver the goods that you pay for and they promised. Basically, they will adhere to the contract. Yeah. And that the company is not involved in something illegal, but illegal in your government eyes. So you are a UK company, so you're obey to European law and you obey to UK law. Yeah. So only thing that interests you usually is whether you work with someone suspicious, but by suspicious I mean it's someone that from your business point will try to steal your money. Yeah. Or if you're working with someone who is your government will basically spank you for working with them, for all kinds of reasons. There might be another company just like that who are very corrupted, very crooked in Russia, but they are not sanctioned. And you're not afraid that they will steal your money, and you will work with them as a business, because unfortunately this is how business works. Yeah. There are interests. So when we say compliance, this is what we mean. I am a UK government. I say you need to comply with this set of rules. You need one of which and several of which is don't work with this kind of company, don't work with this kind of company, and etc. And whatever is beyond it, it's very hard to prove. You can't expect the business to do anything about it, because they will say we don't care about anything, we care about money. Yeah. So I had involvement in I had a touch in a lot of interesting cases, but none of them resulted in sometimes. You just submit a report to a client, and then you have a long conversation with them. Then you summarize what is the company about, and then in the end they say, well, I don't care. Just tell me, would they steal my money? You say, no, probably not, because this is... And it's like, because this company might be related to Putin, what can happen to me? And then you say, well, actually nothing, because worst case scenario, this company will fall under sanctions at some point. But as long as Putin is at power, you kind of, you're safe.
So I guess that one of the questions I have is how obvious is all of this kind of compliance, AML, money laundering type stuff? So if this company that you're doing business with is like a shell company for some kind of money laundering scheme, then... maybe as a company that you're doing business with them, you're still going to get your product, you're still going to get your money or whatever. But when you think about a kind of a global network of money moving between different places, you as a company might not be, or you just don't care very much about that, right?
Well, actually money laundering is something that you should be caring about, because this is something being tangled in money laundering is very so actually if you suspect money laundering involvement, that would be a red flag that I will flag, and then for you as a compliance officer in a company, it will be very, very hard to to ignore this report. So if I imagine me as an analyst, I'm putting a red report on your table and saying this company is involved in anti-money laundering, money laundering. Right. So
that means you definitely shouldn't do
you can ignore it.
Right.
Okay, but then there is the fact that I submitted this report to you, and if there will be problems afterwards, it will be tracked back to you approving this, working with this company despite.
Okay.
So actually compliance officers there really want to cover themselves, but as I mentioned earlier, they want to cover themselves in accordance to the legislation, to the rules, to the Foreign Corruption Practices Act, for example, the US one, and the UK Bribery Act are the two guides two main guides into compliance currently, and actually those guidelines are purposely vague, and the only thing for you is you will see what companies were prosecuted under the Foreign Corruption Practices Act, and then you will see that okay, maybe it resembles to what I do, so maybe I should protect myself, or maybe the profile of the company prosecuted is very similar to profile of my company, and I say, okay, if they basically got in trouble, I need to try to cover myself now before I will get in trouble, because I can't control. If I got 80 offices all over the world and I'm sitting in the US, how do I know that my Russian office doesn't do some misconduct that I don't know about? Yeah. So, but I guess, which brings me again back to this, how is to investigate in Russia. So investigate in Russia is not really investigate in Russia. Sometimes it's very dangerous, like the stories that you heard that people disappeared. And sometimes it's just a compliance basic. It's not even investigation. It's basically analysis and report. So you're not judging. You're not submitting anything to the police. You're just making the connection. You're just looking for compliance stuff first, then reputational stuff, and only then anything else. So your prime interest is not the well-being of people of Russia or people of Belarus. Your prime interest is protecting your client, which can be sometimes really hard, because if you always need to fight your opinions and your ideology with professionalism, basically. Always need to realize that sometimes it's very hard also. You uncover those kind of high-end stuff, not really high-end, but you uncover those kind of things that don't go anywhere, because you just have it, you have the feeling, but then you realize that in order to uncover the real problems, you will need to spend another 5-10 days, but nobody will pay you for it, nobody will appreciate it. It can get you in trouble potentially, and there is no guarantee of positive outcome of anything.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what my interest is, and I think in general it's something like how hidden is all of this stuff? Like, is it very obvious to someone who looks at it, or is it quite buried away? So in the UK, for example, we constantly hear about companies who you'll have someone who owns a company, but then that company like is a subsidiary of something else, and there are these very complex tangled webs where in order to actually trace where the money is actually going would be very difficult. And then the second thing that I can think of is I was at a hackathon maybe 2 months ago, and there was a charity that tracks down corruption in Africa. And they had this huge data set that they'd figured out, that they collected over like 10 years, which was government contracts, like big government contracts in the billions of dollars often, for, you now have a license to dig for oil in this 50-kilometer stretch of land, things like this. And one of the ways that they were trying to detect corruption was to look for in-kind donations. So something that will happen is if you're an oil company and you essentially win a government contract to dig for oil in a certain area of land, and you promise to pay them in certain number of barrels of oil. And then you can either give them way more barrels of oil, and then the government official who accepts this will, pocket the extra money and then split it or whatever, or you pay them way less. But because it's in barrels of oil rather than in cash, it's much more difficult to identify that discrepancy.
At what point, yeah.
So it's like much easier to get away with. So this is something that charity was looking for. But in your experience, is it like very obvious when someone's doing something bad, or do they generally do a good job of hiding and covering their tracks?
In my experience, there is so much on the surface, so much.
Okay.
So in countries with really bad political culture and business culture and corruption culture, so they are so used not to be, prosecuted, not to be caught by anyone. At some point, it becomes very common practice, and a lot of people also see other people do similar stuff for years and not getting busted and being moving only up. So
Right.
So they don't hide it. They're not motivated to hide it.
Well, the challenge is that the people that suffer most from corruption in general are the common people, right? The everyday.
Yeah, the problem with corruption is that you don't see the direct impact of corruption on your society. It's not only money that is taken from taxes. So I will give a couple of examples, but before I do that, I feel that we need to cover again some couple of boring stuff. So the next 2 minutes, let's do the following. Yeah. So first of all, let me start from the beginning. So the company, a company is usually a legal entity. What do we mean by a legal entity? So, it's not a company of people who work together. They are a company, and it's not an army company. So company means that I'm declared a business. A company is not an individual entrepreneur, for example. Sometimes we can be individual entrepreneurs without being a company. So we are a one-person business. And sometimes this one-person business can be a company. Okay, it's all differs in the way that you register yourself. And it influences on how much tax you pay, basically company tax in your country. So if you're a company, you will pay a company tax, and if you're individual entrepreneur, you will pay individual entrepreneur tax. And if you're just an employee, you will pay your regular income tax and etc. So when we say company, I mean in the UK, I mean an entity that is registered in Companies House, that has a unique ID number, which is in most countries is called either company registry number or tax number. Basically, there can't be two companies in the same country, and usually in the world itself, because of the different systems of registration that have the same number.
Yep. Someone next door. Okay,
So every company has a complete unique company registry or tax number, and it's registered in the corporate registrar of this country. In the UK, it's a company house. In Russia, it's the Russian tax registry. Every country has to register them these companies somewhere, and in order to get the taxes from those companies. So every company, usually, not every company, usually the companies have directors, or you can call them officers, basically, because it's not necessarily a director, it can be... so let's say the minimal requirement for a company to have one person who is either an administrator, basically someone responsible for the registration of this company, of management of this company, and if the company... and basically someone who will get to court if the company is sued, a sole person. And in addition to this person, who you can call him CEO, general manager, director, whoever, officer, whatever, the company can have shareholders. The shareholders is the ownership. So when I own a company, I'm a 100% shareholder. If we own the company together, assuming that we are really fair partners, 70-30.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The other way around. I'm being fair with you.
I can tell that you're...
So yeah, let's say 50-50 for the debate.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, but... so we will be 50% shareholders and etc. When we're talking about controlling, so I can control with 51%. So obviously if I got 51 and you got 49, I control. If you got 51, I got 49 and less or more, you control it. So when we say shareholders, this is what we mean. Then we have the beneficial ownership. Okay, it's where it becomes a bit more complicated. So I am another company which own your company. So I own 100% of your company. And another two companies own 50% and 50% over me. Okay?
Okay.
So imagine yourself a pyramid. I'm trying to force myself not to show it with my hands, but describe it with words because it's a podcast. So imagine yourself a pyramid, So imagine yourself couple of layers to this pyramid, which starts from from a company, let's say Apple, and then Apple, we're talking about Apple UK.
Right.
Okay, so you got Apple UK, which is owned by Apple US, which is owned by Apple something, which is owned by a company that owns all the Apple companies in the world, and that would be the beneficial owner, the top of the pyramid. So when we talk about beneficial ownership, we're talking about a person who has control through a couple of steps.
Yep.
And then there it will becomes even more tricky because we don't have clear standards for beneficial ownership. You know, Putin might not own anything in your company, but he will be like de facto beneficial owner of it. You know, and
what do you mean we don't have standards for beneficial ownership?
So if you got a 10% beneficial ownership, you know, like only 10% belong to you through other companies of the final company we're talking about.
Right.
Is it sufficient? Do you control enough to influence this company?
Okay. Doesn't that depend on who else?
So it's dependent on everything. So if you want to standardize it, who will be considered the beneficial ownership, beneficial owner? Usually the cutoff is 25%. So when you do, because if you imagine yourself big organizational structures and big companies, if you're even checking a company like Apple, imagine yourself, you need to work with Apple UK, and now person you hire to check Apple UK goes into all the ownership system of Apple, which is super mega complicated, includes many subsidiaries and daughter companies and complicated scheme. But you don't care about it. You just want to work with Apple UK. So you don't care that who is Apple beneficial owners of Apple US, for example.
Right.
So you care on some level because you need to check it, but you don't really care, you know, if some company has 0.5% in Apple. You don't consider them beneficial owners of all Apple, right? So it becomes very tricky. Usually the cutoff, if you got 25% or more over through pyramid of ownership, like you are beneficial, you consider a beneficial owner.
Okay. Yep.
But this is also a tricky part. So we established that a company has shareholders. Company has a company officer who will be director or CEO.
Yep.
Company has a unique identification number. Most cases, the date of registry.
Yep.
Okay, so if I registered my company yesterday, so it registered from yesterday, and if a similar named company committed a crime 5 years ago, it definitely wasn't my company because I registered only yesterday.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so if I'm you know, forming a company Kosta Ltd, so if it was formed today, I'm responsible on this company for Kosta Ltd from this moment on.
Yeah.
So every company has shareholders, and above the shareholders, the other level of shareholders and the final level of shareholders is called beneficial ownership. So you can go first level, second level, third level, endless amount of levels until you get to the final level, which is the beneficial owners.
Right.
And let's consider them 25+%.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is already sounds complicated and boring and uninteresting, and it is, unfortunately. And believe it or not, this stage, a lot of people very hard to you know, to jump over this kind of boring details because it includes a lot of dry stuff.
I imagine it gets a lot more boring though after, because this is like the first step. But
yeah, it's only understanding what are you looking at.
Right.
Okay, so you need to understand that the company are registered similar over the world. They have similar kind of structures, like we're trying to explain. And they will be appearing, the information about this will be appearing in the corporate registry.
Yep.
So if you're a company, if you're a country like the UK with strong bureaucracy and very strong, you know, very strong bureaucracy mechanism, very strong government.
Yeah.
Corporate registry of the UK is like it's like holy manuscript from the investigation point of view, because you know that if you found a registered company from 1940, you know that this company wasn't changed, this information wasn't changed, and you can prove it in court, and you can refer to it. This is the bulletproof information, because this is legal documents from the UK government. If you are using the Russian registry, it might become tricky, because we already saw during a couple of last years, following anti-corruption investigations, some Russian officials closely related to Putin, to chief prosecutor in Russia, they were able to hide the names and to retrospectively change the register of the companies. So, for example, I accused you in corruption because I found that you were a shareholder in the company that committed corruption. And when I accused you, 2 days after, you retrospectively changed your ownership.
Okay, so if you looked in the directory, it would not say that I was...
So after I accused you, 2 days after this, if I look into this, into the corporate registry, so best case scenario, I won't find anything because they removed the search option for this. So like this is classified information now, so I can't obtain it. Worst case scenario, it was retrospectively changed. So even with the corporate registries, you need to know which corporate registries and who you trust and how you trust.
Yeah.
But getting back to your question about how easy to find corruption, very easy. Okay, very easy to find alleged acts of corruption, shady scheme.
And then very difficult to prove in court.
It's not very, but it is easy to draw a scheme of network of people and to outline something shady going on there.
Yeah.
And then you need the will of power, and then you need motivation, and then you need people around you, and then you need cause, and then you need an active police that will take interest in it, and then you need procedures and etc. And then you will prove an act of corruption that ends. It's a difficult procedure to prosecute and to do something with it, but to find shady information, it's very easy. And here the media comes in. So so if I can prove that your mom, that your mom is connected to some shady operation that can be tracked back to me, and I publish it in the UK newspaper, well, you can go on record and say, "Oh, it's not me, it's my mom," but the press already exposed you, and probably you will be under social pressure to resign your political role, or the police will be incentivized to uncover your corruption because the public will be fuming, like what's going on.
I don't know about that, but okay.
Yeah, theoretically, I'm saying, higher you go, more public interest they have. So you have a lot of interest in uncover some minister involved in some corruption, but you don't really care someone from administration of Newcastle involved in mild corruption in Newcastle.
But if you're smart, then when the corruption story, as soon as it hits the front pages, you'll just make sure you release another story which is about some footballer cheating on his wife, and then everyone will start paying attention to the other
but we
thing.
already, if the demon is, God bless the organizations, the NGOs like Transparency and Human Rights Watch and etc., that they won't let this kind of slip because they're not super interested in football. Mostly. So when I say God bless, I shouldn't say God bless because it's like I usually I just realized that
No, it's okay. I'm just gonna quickly turn the heater on because I'm getting a little bit cold. But
I'm gonna load up on beers.
Oh yeah.
Put me on record.
So we're still running. So.
Yeah, I know.
A little bit chilly. Do you want to go downstairs or are you okay here?
No, fine.
Yeah.
I'm not chilly also. You're right for now. Like, tell me when you're losing me, because like I'm not going. Those kind of stuff are.
It's interesting. I'm curious to know how it like connects back to more everyday experiences. So I'm trying to like relate it back to.
So I will go back. I promise. I'm just trying to form some kind of baseline of terms, because I realized that when we talk about shareholders, it's not obvious to a lot of people who are we talking about? Beneficial owners, the same. When you talk about governmental tenders, honestly, I didn't know what it is until I started just like taking like very, very active interest. And even after that, it took me a while to understand.
Okay.
So back to your African story about African corruption surrounding governmental tenders.
Yeah.
So Russia, for example, it's most of its corruption goes through governmental tenders. So this is how Putin channels money. And when I say Putin, it doesn't mean that he's personally involved in illicit tenders. But this is the best way to channel money when you're in power in Russia, is to award your friends with precious governmental tenders for a lot of money that nobody checks.
Right, and the governmental tender is basically just like...
So do you know what a governmental tender is? Like, what is it in your understanding?
All right, I can have a go. So it's basically government needs some work done. They need like a road built, or they need some hospital ward added, or some kind of service like data-oriented, whatever it is. So they issue a contract, which is, we want to pay this amount of money, or we need this work done. They send it out to all the companies that have expertise in that area. They will be paying attention. Then they can put in proposals and say, we're willing to pay this much to do it, and they'll put all of their proposals in, and then the government will pick one of those companies, will award the contract, and then we'll pay them X amount of money to do a certain job. And it seems like the opportunity for corruption comes up because it's like, if you allocate £10 million to build a road, and then you give it to a company that you have a connection with, then they spend £5 million to build a crappy road that is actually going to fall apart much quicker than expected, and all this kind of stuff. And then they keep half the money to one side. Then you end up with this situation where there's a lot of government money that goes and disappears and ends up in offshore accounts. And it's difficult to track and probably quite frustrating for the people that live in those places.
Okay. That was perfect description of what governmental tender is and what is one of the issues. The main one, but still the corruption starts way before even, like when you allocate £10 million, who decided that this should be £10 million and not £3 million?
Right.
Who is the commission, the expert commission who decided this road needs an investment of 10 million and not 5 million or 3 million?
Yeah. Well, also the scary thing is that like governments have such huge capital controlling resources. Like it's kind of crazy when you think about how much money is involved at the government level.
Okay. So let me come on record here and declare that this is great that the government has all of this money, that it manages it for us. And I have no doubt that if this money was managed by private hands, it would be horribly mismanaged, much more than any government can screw up. Okay.
Yeah. Very serious point.
Okay. My all of my points will be like, we don't need to like, great solution. Let's take all of this government out of all of this money out of government hands and put it into private hands to manage. This is an absolute worst solution for any problem in my eyes, in my opinion. So, only one thing that we need to explain before we go into the governmental stuff is the offshore accounts. So we all hear a lot of blah blah, offshore leaks, offshore this, offshore accounts, offshore Emma Stone involved in offshore accounts.
Of course.
Google it.
Everyone is excuse to Google Emma Stone.
Is Emma Stone involved in corruption in Russia? Who knows? But so what do we mean by an offshore account? And this is for you, UK citizen. A lot of times we mean to British Virgin Islands and Cyprus, perfectly
Cayman
good
Islands,
European country, Cayman Islands, kids. Endless possibilities. We're talking about jurisdictions that have very lenient approach towards ownership. So I can open a company there and nobody will ask me any questions and nobody will ask for too much taxes.
Okay. Can I open a company there? Or do you? Isn't there like?
Okay. Why won't you?
Because I don't have enough money.
What do you mean? It's not so expensive to open a company. I'm sure you can get some around 5,000 euros or so. And I'm sure that all you need to do is, basically pay money for the bureaucracy and they will manage it for you. You can use Mossack Fonseca, for example, very famous company, was recently involved in the Paradise Leaks.
Oh yeah, it hasn't their reparation like tanked now after the Paradise Leaks?
Well, obviously, yeah, but
25%.
But there are only ones. Paradise Leaks is Appleby. Mossack Fonseca is the Panama Leaks.
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter. I'm just saying that they're only one of certain agents that will handle your money.
So a lot of them are based in London as well.
Yeah, probably for Appleby you won't have enough money because it's like more white collar. But I think you can open a company in Cyprus, or Cyprus is favorable by Russians because you can, it's close, it's sunny, it's nice. A lot of Russians live here. There is a whole industry in Cyprus that supports
would I actually
Russian
need to go
oligarchs.
to Russia? Would I actually need to go to Cyprus if I open a company in Cyprus?
Sometimes yes, sometimes not. Sometimes you send someone, but someone's signature.
Can't I just do it from the comfort of my own home?
You can, but it will be more problematic to manage it. So if you want the full control, because imagine that if you're just a person, it's not a problem for you to do it. But if you're just a corruptionaire, you need somehow to be yours eventually. Like you need some piece of this to be eventually yours. Because otherwise you will be relying on other people. So unless you are someone strong like Putin, what can guarantee that someone you channel your money through won't run with your money or won't disappear? If the money is legally theirs.
It's true. I can't go to the government because then they'll... but all of this is legal, right? It's all...
So this is an absolutely legal practice. Go to British Virgin Islands or do it through a company from here. It doesn't matter. You can open a British Virgin company. Your company will be absolutely legal. You won't pay any tax from this company. So this company can... I'm not sure, to be honest, about the UK legislation, but let's say in Russia, this company can win a governmental tender for supplying medical equipment.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the most common corruption scheme in Russia, which is illicit tenders. So this is very, very simple scheme. You're a governmental official, crooked one. I'm your friend or proxy or partner in crime or whatever. You sit on one side, you're in a hospital, and you do procurement for the hospital. I sit on the other side. I'm supplying you with what you need to be supplied with.
Yep.
It can be, a shipment of 2 million rubber gloves. It can be a shipment for a CT machine. It can be bins, just the trash bins for the whole hospital. It can be pencils, and it can be whatever. It can be all of those together from one supplier.
Yeah.
So it brings us closely to what is the damage of corruption, for example.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's the damage of corruption in very simple example. So CT machines, CT, you know what CT is?
CT scans,
it's this fun machine that scans your brain when you
it's huge magnets.
Yeah, the huge magnet is like very, very impressive, very nice technology. Helps to find not only brain tumors these days, everything.
There's really very intricate 3D models.
Yeah, so in deep Russia, there are a huge shortage of CT machines. I didn't pull statistics for this, but the ratio for machine per population is very, very poor in these areas. But so in early 2000s, they decided to modernize it a little bit and to buy some equipment.
Okay.
So they released a lot of governmental Ministry of Health tenders for this kind of machinery, and almost all of those tenders were crooked, illicit, and corrupted. It's unbelievable.
Okay.
You see companies' involvement, like Siemens allegedly. So Siemens Russia, they apparently, I don't want to come up with accusations that are not 100% supported, so we will have to check it later.
Okay.
So from what I remember, Siemens...
Yeah, we can... no one's going to listen to this, so it's okay. But
no, it doesn't matter. Like, even if it's only me and you gonna listen to it, or only nobody, we need to be professional. Okay. Yeah, well, like so, I'm not going to be. It's not because I'm afraid of Siemens. It's because like all the people and all the establishment I'm against, like it's very unprofessional. We always blame like fake news kind of stuff, and like and accusing.
Okay, so there is some company.
So do Siemens Russia city corruption. Let's see what comes up.
Bribery was just a line item. Okay. The SEC complaint.
So this is from Siemens paid a lot of money for that. They were like they paid the debt society by being one of the companies prosecuted by the Foreign Corruption Practices Act.
Okay.
But apparently what Siemens did, they won. When I say won, I put a quotation marks around won governmental tenders by bribing the person who publishes the tender. So they would publish the tender for a CT machine in such way that only the Siemens CT machine will fit the description.
Okay.
And Siemens can ask any price if they know that they are the only one who fit the description, right? So if I'm saying I got $2 million now, I want to buy as many CT machines as possible. So if it's a fair contest between CT providers, one of them will win for $1 million, and I can buy 2 machines. If I don't have this kind of luxury of competition, I will have Siemens coming with an offer $1.7 million, and this is the offer that I will take because this is my money. Basically, this is. And the machine will be hugely overpriced, and me and you will split the difference. Well, you order the machine from me, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And the people of Russia will be the direct losers because they could get 2 machines for this money, and they got only 1. And you don't know if this machine that they got was the optimal machine that they need. A lot of times, hospitals were ordering more than 1 machine when they needed only 1, because it was easier to do the scheme, and Siemens were pushing to sell more. And some hospitals did not even unpack those machines because they were already old or not maintained well, or the contract didn't include maintenance or assembly, etc. So basically, all of these innovative initiative in Russia went in vain because people from deep areas of Russia, they didn't have CT machines, and then the Ministry of Health bought a CT machine for inflated price, double the price. It wasn't assembled, so practically you don't have a CT machine. So like, we bought one for you, but you can't use it. So and this is a life and death kind of, like you could
like similar stories.
A lot of people could have lived, but they didn't live because the CT machine weren't assembled, and etc. This is really only one small example. Actually the evaluation in Russia is that up to 30% of governmental budget through this kind of scheme goes to through corruption schemes goes away. So if the government of Russia want to spend $100 million on healthcare, they will spend only 70, and 30 of them will go into corrupted schemes. And this has direct effect on everything that the government supplies to the people. On every commodity that people of Russia get is only 70% efficiency to start with. We're not talking about implementation, we're talking about the price. And obviously the implementation is crap if you don't have competition.
And shall we go back to what you were saying about private companies and public, government versus private companies?
Oh yeah, of course.
So are private companies just as susceptible in their procurement process to this kind of bribery and corruption?
Big private companies in such countries. So Siemens Russia is a good example. Again, we bring it again. So apparently the Siemens department they had in Russia, in Vietnam, in China, I think. So in certain locations, the Siemens, they went not rogue, because the main company kind of encouraged this kind of, but went being too much independent, you know. So they did this stuff. Siemens as a company didn't earn the corrupted money, because their product was oversold. So I am as Siemens, I sell one machine for 1 million. Okay, if you sold my machine for 1.3 million without telling me, you pocket the difference, but I get 1 million anyway.
Regardless, yeah.
So from Siemens' point of view, they also lost some of the money in this. And big companies, in procurement departments.
But I'm thinking more like on the other side, like if you are, buying. So if Apple is buying a bunch of components for their phones, then they, in theory, could fall susceptible to this thing where a supplier promises certain quality of components and then they deliver like a much lower quality, charge more. That means that Apple the price of iPhones goes up.
Oh, okay.
Like that kind of thing.
But Apple has much stronger incentive to, because it's Apple's money.
Yeah.
So they want, in order to maximize the profits and in order to make the money, because they don't want to lose any money, because the government lost money on this illicit tender. And Apple, if they will start losing money on illicit tenders, somebody will get fired.
Yeah. But so then why do you say that private companies are much worse at managing money?
Because Apple manages the profit. So like if Apple profits next year $1 billion, or a year afterwards they will profit $2 billion, what do you care?
Right.
Like if you're poor man or a normal person living in London, you don't have Apple shares, so you don't profit with them. So I'm a strong believer in commodities, and I'm a strong believer in equal opportunities. And if the corporation supplies you with water or with internet, which I consider the same commodity as water these days, it has to be supplied by yourself, basically, by your taxes, by your government. By you being a citizen, you should be eligible for those kind of stuff. Same with healthcare. So for me, it's not the solution to give Apple my healthcare. To me, it's like to demand not corrupted healthcare.
Yeah, I've definitely heard like libertarian people make that argument that, when we live on Mars or something, then all public services should be provided by private companies and you should just pay out of your pocket.
I wish they could get to Mars not using the technology developed by US and Russian government.
Right.
All of this Tesla stuff, it's like all NASA and all the Russian, Soviet, basically the Cold War race to space was 100% done by governments. And this ignited all of this innovation and all of this space race. Okay, libertarians couldn't race; they would still racing each other for I don't know, for some launching one rocket. Okay, because one person is not an organism. I hear a lot of this debate, and again, full disclosure, like you probably already noticed from my remarks, I'm not great fan of libertarian. I'm more into government managed commodities. So I'm a strong believer that we all have commodities that are common to us, which includes the environment, because the libertarians they become awfully quiet when you start talking about environment, because libertarian theory doesn't take into account caring about something that you shouldn't be caring. You should be caring about only yourself. Why would I care about trees if I'm an asshole? This is kind of so. Let's start with the environment as the most difficult topic for libertarians. So this is a commodity. We need to keep it in order to use it, all of us. Water is a commodity. Electricity is a commodity. Transportation and freedom of movement, our infrastructure is a commodity. Infrastructure is also internet. So I consider those kind of stuff as your basic right. Education, by the way, like every libertarian who will start talking about not free education, we already will have strong disagreement. By the way, the 21st century will bring the free education, and it's already here. So,
you mean like online education, or
I mean the 2 billion people in Africa who are outperforming Harvard education and etc. with an access to online courses. So, by the way, do you know that if you do an online course open to everyone, the first 500 people that will have the top score, none of them will be from any top university,
Yeah,
okay?
possibly.
It's only shows you that it's not the quality of the education, it's the access to education is the only thing that matters. And all the people who think they're genius because they studied in I don't know, one of the top universities, you are very smart people, but you have another 2 billion people with zero access to what you have that you don't take into account. So.
Yeah, I know my friends who grew up in Kenya and places like that, they had a much tougher academic experience than I did growing up. Yeah. Like, because in order to do well in those systems, you have to be like really, really good.
Yeah. So my point is that governmental system should be nurtured and maintained.
Yeah.
Rather than the solution for corruption won't be privatization.
Right.
I would say that the privatization would only encourage corruption in culture. Look at Russia. Look at Russia, all the oligarchs in Russia. How do you become an oligarch in Russia? Do you know?
Good question.
Let me tell you a story. How do you become an oligarch in Russia?
Born into it, or you?
No. All the oligarchs in Russia, they're self-made.
Okay.
And they all made their money through privatization.
Okay. Capitalists, basically.
In the late 90s, so the Russian government were strapped for money.
Yeah.
They needed money. So they got into agreement with a lot of rich people, basically the capital, that the people will... so they were loaning the government money. So, for example, Abramovich...
Yep.
Roman Abramovich, famous oligarch, Chelsea FC owner, and ex-Russian politician. So someone like Abramovich will come and will say, I got $2 billion, not $2 billion, $100 million that I somehow brought. I got an investor, I got some dubious money in it. And we want to buy nickel, the metal.
Yep.
Okay, nickel factory in Siberia. Okay, so
the government-owned nickel factory.
Not to buy a nickel factory. Sorry, we will loan the government $100 million, and the government will sign off that if the government doesn't give me the money back in a couple of years, I will get a nickel factory it's basically guarantee.
Oh, okay.
Okay, like mortgage, like the bank will take your house if you're not paying your mortgage.
I'm wondering what the advantages of doing it that way, but okay, let's
so the government knowingly knew that they won't give the money back.
But they will build the nickel factory.
No. The nickel factory already exists. It's governmental now.
Okay, that's like collateral against the loan.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Collateral.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I forgot the word.
Okay, yeah.
So, so the nickel factory would be a collateral in the loan.
Okay.
But when I take your money, you and me, we already know that I won't give you the money back, and the factory will become yours in short period. Okay.
So you get the factory really cheap.
Yeah. So you got like a nickel factory that over 10 years will bring you $5 billion. You got it for $100 million, and basically without any tender and without any contest, because you loaned the government the money, and the government just didn't give it back. So the penalty is you getting the factory.
Yeah.
So this is how they bypassed, by the way, the tender schemes. Otherwise, they will have to put this company into, the government will sell the factory, and you will need to buy it, and then people will say like, what the hell? It's $5 billion company. How come we sold it for 100 million to someone?
Oh, and if you do it the other way, people don't spot it.
If you do it the other way, it doesn't matter. It's not like it's the government couldn't pay you back. You got it as a collateral. You didn't buy it. If the government would bring you the money back with credit,
right? But isn't there legislation that's like, if I give you...
It's not legislation. It was a privatization scheme for Russian oligarchs in the middle 90s. And this is how most of the Russian oligarchs that you see right now got their money.
But what was the incentive for people who owned the nickel, so the government who owned the nickel factory before? What was the incentive for them to sign this kind of contract?
First of all, there were a couple of interesting schemes for privatization in Russia. This is one of them, the most famous. And the interest of the government was to get the money first, because they needed liquidity.
Badly, yeah.
Yeah, they needed cash. And...
and
just made more. And also, like personal relations. So the person who signed off the loan is the person that already has a connection to the person who buys, who gives the money. So if you're giving me $100 million to government, but I'm the one who's signing it off, you don't know what else were on the table. You might throw in some 5 million to me, for example, and I will gladly sign. I would gladly sign off in Russia any kind of deal for $5 million. In Russia, it was crazy mental money in the 90s. It would be like your grandchildren would be like rich people. So this is one of the scheme. Other scheme was more straightforward. So for example, governmental factories. So after the Soviet Union broke, all the employees, they got a share in the factory. So if we were 10,000 employees, each one will get one share out of the 10,000. But people didn't realize what it is. It's like it was like a voucher.
Okay. I'm interested in that. So I was reading a book about Egypt, and apparently there was something very similar that happened in the 40s, I think, where it's a communist revolution, and they essentially said that anyone who owns more than 200 acres of land, the rest of the land is now public property, and we're going to distribute it amongst everyone.
Yeah.
But what happened in Russia when this happened?
This is the vice versa. This is the other process. So what happens when we say, okay, this factory, because the Soviet Union declared that this factories belong to the people. Okay. So this factory, I don't want it to belong to the people anymore. I want it to be more private. So who will be owning it? So I say, okay, people who work there, the 10,000 employees, I let them own this factory. So this factory now is, let's say, half governmental owned, and the other half is private hands. When I say private hands, I mean it's 10,000 shares that the employees, the factory employees got.
Okay, and what do people do with that ownership? Like, because if you just sit on it, it's worth a lot.
If you just sit on it, if you understand what it is, right. But if you're a simple Russian employee and you got someone who comes to you and say, well, I'll give you $200, again, crazy money at the time in Russia. I will get you $200 for it. You will say, yeah, why not?
Was there a lot of like mob related stuff? Because I imagine that when things, I don't know if this is true, but I would imagine if 100 people just suddenly got given a bunch of wealth, then there would be a lot of like shaking up and people coming to your house and demanding that you give your share over.
Not demanding, implying.
Exactly.
Exactly that.
I mean, similar things. So there's an interesting story that happened in India, which is there's a place called Gurgaon, which is not too far from Delhi. And there used to be a bunch of farmers that lived on that land. And the government essentially bought up all the property, gave them a bunch of money because they wanted to build this new like tech hub type place. And then so a lot of these farmers, this was the first time they'd seen this kind of money before. So they went out and bought like really expensive cars and guns and knives and all this kind of stuff. And apparently it's like quite dangerous to go to some parts of town because you have all these people who just suddenly got given a load of money and now have like a lot of power in their local area.
Yeah, so this was redistribution of money and power in Russia, and this is one of the schemes. So obviously it's very hard to imagine the scale of it, but it was huge, and Russia is a huge country, and the Soviet Union left everything in disarray, and it was a mess. And the oligarchs that emerged now, some of them died on the way from the mobs, from the mafia, from the Russian, because remember, let me get back to the three pillars of Russia. It's church, oligarchs, and crime.
And what year did this redistribution happen, like roughly? This was
so after the Soviet Union
after
fell.
The fall, okay.
Because none of them. So basically, the Russian. The criminal world existed, but the church and the oligarchs didn't exist in the Soviet Union, and the criminal world wasn't introduced to power like it's introduced now. I'm telling you, I'm talking about direct criminals. The person who killed Litvinenko in 2006 in London. He's a member of parliament right now.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know that we knew who that person was.
Okay, and this person is not a criminal. This person, I'm referring this person to the ex-KGB branch.
Yep.
Okay, this is Putin muscle.
Yep.
Okay, but these kind of people you have in the parliament, and some of the people supported in the parliament, they're like clear-cut criminals or ex-criminals or associated with hardcore criminals with Russian. It's a whole aristocracy in Russia, the high criminal.
Yeah. So what's the situation in England like? So I know that. Do you believe, or from what you've heard, that there are similar kinds of schemes and things that happen here with government contracts and tenders being misused?
Oh, okay. So this kind of corruption is very common. So I would be pleasantly surprised, and I wasn't pleasantly surprised by almost anything in England in my 4 years tenure. Okay, I would be very pleasantly surprised if it doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would imagine, and I want to hope at least that here in England they will have to hide more.
Okay.
You know, you will have slightly more public attention, because most of these corruption schemes are uncovered by people and independent investigators on newspapers rather than by the police, because police doesn't have, honestly, a lot of police forces, at least in Israel,
the resources,
and in Russia. In Russia, they're demotivated, and some of them are part of the schemes. And in Israel, a lot of them are just not educated enough and don't know what to do, and like they are not motivated enough, not incentivized enough to find stuff. And when finding stuff, I mean, it's a lot of boring work again to triangulate different kind of information. So basically, if I want to uncover an illicit tender, it might be a lot of work. It's not difficult work. It's an easy work, but it might be time consuming.
Should write an AI to do it. I wonder if anyone's tried that.
So yeah, probably they did, but it's very hard because
so many different sources of information.
So let's imagine that we want to find and identify an illicit tender.
Yeah.
Okay, so for that. But obviously, I won't sign my name under an act of corruption. Okay, so it's not you and me. We are high school buddies, and I want to give you to give you a tender for 100 million construction site. So first of all, I would like to distance myself from giving the tender. So I will be trying to make someone else to sign it off.
Yeah.
But someone else who I trust.
Yeah.
Okay, it can be like someone from the city. So it will be either one of my closest aides or one of my relatives or my relative's relative. Okay, someone close to me. So then you might also want to disappear from the picture somehow. But let's say it will be not your company, it will be your company's company. So your company will open another subsidiary, another daughter company that will win the tender for construction. So let's say that you won the tender, and now I want to catch you. So I will have to take a look really well for a basically to the tender itself. So it's written. So you are ordering a service from me. You are ordering a city machine. In your description of the city machine, you will describe the requirements. You will say it should be such and such power. It should have such and such features.
Yeah.
So first line for me would be to scoop over this description and see if something stands out. So suddenly I see that you say that the power of the machine should be certain amount of kilowatts that only one brand has.
How would you know that only one brand has that?
That's the thing. You will have to give someone who is an expert to take a look. Okay, so you will be sitting first scoop. You will scoop over, and you will say, okay, I just asked an expert, and all the experts said that this machine should cost around 1 million. And I see a tender for 2 million. So it's already inflated price. It's already a red flag for me.
Yeah.
Then I'm starting to go into the details. I'm saying, okay, so before I show it to the expert, let's see. So what information I can see that is suspicious or not nice or something shady is going on there. And then I will show it to someone who understands the city machines, and usually they will say, "Oh my God, like it should cost half of the price." And actually, this tender suits only Siemens city machines. And I will be okay. Let's start digging. So we already got some kind of clue what's going on. So we have inflated price, and we have Siemens machines that are only suitable. So next logical step would be to take the Siemens company in the country, Russia, UK, whatever, win the tender, and try to connect it to the person who signed off the procurement.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, and when you describe it, you imagine yourself like this exhausting investigation, but sometimes you just like Google and first thing you see is it's basically the Siemens director and the person from the hospital being in the same class together, or something like that, or like or the person who owns a company that won the tender is the daughter of the person who offered the tender or the tender. You know, sometimes it's just
far enough away that it's not zero work. It's like there's
it's not zero work. It's like it's work, and it's and it should come from some kind of suspicion theoretically.
Yeah, I wonder if we're far away from someone like building an algorithm to automate this process. Like.
This someone will have to be very specific, and there is a lot of stuff. So this is only one small scheme and one small. So I don't think we are far capabilities wise with there, but with all of those stuff with corruption, it's motivation is the key. Because do you have a motivation now really to spend time on random 500 tenders, scooping over each one of them, see if something's suspicious, and 90% of the cases that are suspicious is because you don't understand enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So nobody has that. And then in countries like Russia, then what do you do when you uncover it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Translation, the language and all that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and I mean, in the UK, I think the common story that gets told a bit more is this whole idea of, because the country comes from monarchy basically, and the class system and nobility and peasantry, and like there was a much more structured hierarchy of, you know, who's allowed to be a landowner and who isn't. And so the thing about corruption is that it seems like it's only for the very wealthy, or at least, you know, the top 1% or 5% people who have access to. Who would be responsible for these big government contracts?
But it doesn't have to be big government contract to be a corruption. So when I'm telling you about Russia, that's the thing. It's all of the government contracts. It's like 30% of the government, whether it's pencils in orphan house, or a city machine, or a new medicine, or a spaceship, or doesn't matter what. You can be sure it doesn't matter what is the tender, high chance that up to 30% of it goes into the gray and black market. You know, people direct act of corruption. And this is the thing, and same in the UK. I agree with you that the people you should go after, usually, you should always start big. Okay, a tax authority in country that prosecutes students that do side jobs and don't report, okay, but then leaves these huge tycoons with tax breaks and don't crack down on offshore accounts and illicit tenders and stuff like, and gray kind of stuff, don't have my respect, honestly. Okay, so yeah, definitely, if you want to crack down on corruption, okay, so I would expect to see a UK Bribery Act, for example, enforced on some big company at some point.
Has that ever happened?
From my recall,
how has the UK Bribery Act been?
UK Bribery Act, I don't remember any convictions. Bribery Act convictions, right?
2010. Okay, so 7 years.
No, the act is from 2010, but I don't think that they prosecuted anyone in accordance to this.
See what we could be.
To be honest, with the new Tories government, nothing will happen, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's not. Tories are very lenient towards offshore accounts. Tory don't agree with me about being transparent and stuff. Tories want, after Brexit, to make UK offshore jurisdiction to Europe. so you can be able to register companies here. Tories.
Is that true?
Yeah, the UK government looks at very, very lenient eye towards Russian money and not Russian, Chinese and etc. money from all kinds of governmental officials, like corrupted people, and the money flows into UK, and they're kind of okay with it.
I mean, the people, when I talk to people about this, they say that if you were to kind of clean up London and crack down on all this kind of stuff, then you would just cause so much money to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you think we should be worried about?
About money leaving?
Yep.
Oh, I would, I would open the gates and put roses on the road of this money leaving this country, because this is dirty money and it should leave as soon as possible. Because like UK once was like an empire, and one was an industrial country that like was very powerful, and now it's slowly and surely becoming tax heaven, and all this dirty money. It's very easy to come here, buy real estate, and then someone from London will be very annoyed, like you're a foreigner, you're coming here, you're buying a real estate with your dirty money. We don't want you, we want Brexit. And then the Brexit breach brings only more of this kind of behavior. It becomes only easier for me to come here and to buy your property under you. I have even less regulation on me.
Yeah, exactly, and then causes house prices to go up.
All the Brexit will do is you expel some nurses out of the UK, and you will bring some dirty money in.
Well, that's one of the most frustrating things about the whole narrative around Brexit, is that it's like a focus on like low-skilled immigrants who don't actually take that much money away, but all of this corruption stuff and the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers and everything seems to reveal like a much worse level of wealth being pulled out of the country. But people seem to care less about it for some reason. People like
because it's boring.
It's like
it's boring as hell. So like we didn't even get to like how to connect. So Panama Papers is a great example of great thing. So what started happening New Age, when we talked about the corporate registries and about the companies and about the offshore jurisdictions. So offshore jurisdiction make it almost impossible for you to go and legally check who owns a company.
Why is that?
Because this is how they work. This is your reason. Like, why would you open an offshore account? Because you want to hide it.
Like Companies House where I can just search.
Yeah, because you want to hide your ownership.
If I wanted to search for a company in whatever it is, Cayman Islands.
So you can. British government can launch an official request to Cayman Islands, and the Cayman Islands they will expose this company specific shareholders to you. If you're a British government, and you make it out your interest to do it.
Yeah.
But it will be something like terror case. You need, as a British government, to request it. You need the reason.
Right. Like a warrant.
So it needs to pop up somewhere.
And how does the money transfer between like being on mainland UK versus going to these places? Is that a difficult process?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure how do you transfer the money, but it's it's like, imagine yourself British Virgin Islands, the British in the Virgin Islands. It's not coincidence. Okay,
yeah,
it's very easy. This is a jurisdiction that Britain uses itself for offshore accounts. Okay, so this practice is very common in the UK. I want to outline that this practice is legal, and you should be able to register a company whenever you want. Some countries started getting an approach that you can't win a governmental tender if you're not disclosing your shareholding, and offshore companies can't win governmental tenders. So this is already becoming an issue.
Okay. We don't know if that happens in the UK or not.
No, it won't happen in the UK in the foreseen future. And we start seeing a lot of effort from people to organize themselves and because your best shot at it and your best way to tackle it is to expose as much information as possible. To give access to information is the best way to tackle corruption, basically. Is to transparency. That's why the best NGO in the field is Transparency International, and the clue is in the name. Transparency is everything. So in Panama Papers, for example, so it was a bulk data of offshore companies, basically, almost without not a lot of super useful information hidden amongst those like millions of documents.
Yeah.
But basically it exposed offshore companies' owners that are not exposed other ways in a legal way. So it gave people like me and you an access to this information. And then first impact was first months journalists were looking for some Tony Blair, Emma Watson, celebs. You look for celebs. Yeah. And it's cool, but this is not the point. Emma Stone having an offshore account because she's like optimizing tax. Fair enough. It's a legal practice. It's legal practice in the UK. Why would you be angry at her if this is your government's policy? Half of the members of parliaments in your government are optimizing taxes through that way or another. So it's a bit hypocritical to criticize people who have an offshore account. Okay, this is not what I'm doing. I'm not like you can have an offshore account, whatever. You want to optimize your tax. You don't want to pay tax in the UK. Fine. Like I want to pay tax in the UK because I'm aspired to become a UK citizen at one point. And for me, it's like it's like an important feature of being a citizen is paying taxes.
Yeah.
Some of the more rich share people in the UK that don't agree with me on it, fine. Yep. As long as the government is good with it, I'm good. But what were the precious pearls in this Panama Papers? A lot of companies started popping up in other investigations, or popped up earlier in other investigations, and people started connecting the dots. So, for example, I put one of the example. I put it on paper. I will share it with you later, so we can put it as a link as a scheme that I'm describing.
Yeah.
It's a very simple scheme. So before Panama Papers, we had some company named. 1 second. It has a funny name. It's always. So you have a company named Z-Bar Management. Okay. And this company made a payment to a company named Trans Group Invest.
Okay.
So Z-Bar Management is a company from Panama, and Trans Group Invest is a company from Estonia. Okay. So a Panamese company made the payment to an Estonian company. Who cares?
Okay.
Made to like $130,000 or something like that. So after Panama Papers, we discovered that Z-Bar Management company is actually so we didn't know about this Z-Bar Management. We knew that Z-Bar Management was related to some Russian corruption case. And suddenly we saw from the Panama Papers, it was exposed that this company made a transaction to this money transaction to this Estonian company. Okay. So the only thing that the Panama Papers revealed is Z-Bar making transaction to an Estonian company. Nothing. But this Z-Bar company was involved in previous corruption case, and it was connected directly to someone in Russia, someone who is corrupted, who is knowingly corrupted.
But we don't know anything about the Estonian company.
Yeah, we don't know anything, but we know the transaction was made, and we have a next line. We're saying, okay, what is this Estonian company? So we start checking the Estonian company ownership, and then we see that until 2012, it was owned by a Russian official from the Moscow transport, from the Moscow government. So there is Moscow government, not Russian government. So he is the Minister of Transport of Moscow, kind of high rank in the Russian official. It belonged to him until 2012, and then it was transferred to his ex-wife. Usually, like the ex-wife comes for the ex, so they don't have to declare together. Okay, so they live together, but they formally on paper they divorce before he goes into becomes an official. So they won't have to declare together their incomes. So Panama Papers suddenly exposed this valuable connection between this Zibar company and someone in Russian Moscow Ministry of Transport. And you can go to the date, check the dates of the transaction, and relate it to a specific tender, for example, that this person who is related to Zibar won from the Moscow government. Okay, and suddenly this Panama paper exposed like a small piece of information that dragged a whole puzzle around it.
Right.
But this puzzle was connected by people who were looking towards, you basically Russian opposition who had a beef with this guy from Moscow. So they started looking into everything connected to him, and they got to this immediately after it was released through Panama Papers. So, so it had a big impact, but it had a big impact in something that you couldn't expect.
Right.
Okay, you could forecast that this is something that can happen, but you couldn't expect this exactly thing to happen and this exact connection to pop up. And you need to have to be vigilant for it. And it took a couple of months until they started looking.
And is it mainly journalists that are doing this work, or is it?
Yeah, so mainly journalists and anti-corruption. So we all imagine this, good forces that fight evil, that do their work, but none of them is incentivized. So sometimes it's journalists, sometimes it's opposition groups, sometimes it's we don't have enough incentive to push people or to ask people.
Do you think the UK government will create an anti-corruption wing at some point?
I think the UK government got enough regulation and mechanism. I think that the UK government is not implementation and enforcement is the problem, because the UK government in its root and in my opinion, the current UK government in its spirit, it's not interested to fight corruption.
Right.
It's like it's interested in a lot of talking, in a lot of making themselves do something, but they're not really interested in tackling this kind of corruption.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It is now quite.
Let's
8:30.
Oh shit! I talked for like almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So I didn't get into to half of it.